All right, it seems like we now have a good time to start the presentation. So we're going to kick it off here to start discussing our webinar today, which is titled Top 3 Pitfalls When Migrating to Office 365. Oops, I clicked forward too quickly. We've got myself, Wade Walker. I'm the Director of Cloud Technologies here at Big Green IT. And we've got Ryan Starkweather, our Senior Engineer, and he's going to deep dive into these top 3 pitfalls of migrating to Office 365.
Morning, everybody.
Morning, Ryan. You can see I'm Wade, so I'm waving here, my hand to the screen, and Ryan's got the nice white headphones on. There we go. Everybody's going to be attending this webinar. You're going to get a copy of the slide deck. So no need to furiously write down notes. We'll have the slide deck out for you, and it will have the links to the resources that we're referring to. I'm going to give a high-level overview of Office 365 and Microsoft 365, and then Ryan's going to run through the Office 365 migration steps. The agenda that you saw in the webinar invitation is listed here. So we're going to hit on these. And again, I'm going to have a higher level view of Office 365, and then Ryan's going to get into the nitty gritty. Nope, went to the next slide too quickly. First off, though, we're going to do some poll questions here. So let me look down on the screen here and start a poll questions. The first one that we're going to launch is, are you currently using Office 365? So if you could go into the go to webinar meeting applet and respond to that poll, that would be great. All right, we're right at a 50-50 ratio right now, so keep getting in your votes. And I see that we've had a few people join here. So for those who joined a few minutes late, don't worry, we haven't gone very far yet. We're only on the third slide deck. We just did an overview of the webinar, top 3 pitfalls for migrating to Office 365, listing up the agenda here, and then we've got a poll that's open. So for those who just joined, if you can answer that poll and submit your answer, that'd be great. Right now, we're still at a good mixture of people that have and haven't migrated to Office 365. Let's give 5-10 more seconds for this poll. Get your answers in now. All right, a few more seconds and I'm gonna close the poll. All right, perfect, closing the poll. Thank you for your votes. And then one more poll question. It's a little cryptic. Where is your primary email? We've got a few options here. If something's not Exchange or Office 365, just go ahead and choose Exchange 2010 or something like that, and we can get back to you later to see if it's a non-Microsoft product. So
this will help us too with tailoring some of the content, right, and being able to address some things. Perfect.
Right.
Numbers coming in there. That's good.
Yeah, as Ryan mentioned, we use these to tailor some of our content, change some of our talking points to make sure it's customized to today's audience. We still have a good number of Exchange 2010, 2013 users. Leave the poll open. A few more seconds. You guys were quick on filling out this poll. Thank you. Appreciate it. All right, so it's I'm going to close the poll now. So thank you for that. We got a good almost 40% of people on Exchange, which helps us to our talking points. So thank you for that. Next slide here, kind of our brag list of who we are as a Big Green IT. We've got our listed collection of Microsoft Gold competencies, platform partner, Office 365 partner. A good quote from one of our top customers. We're doing a lot of Office 365 work with them, and we're doing a lot of Azure work as well. And you can see on the bottom some of our customer sizes. So we range from some rather large customers to medium sized and some small sized customers. Since we do have a good number of people that are still evaluating and looking at Office 365, I'm going to give that high-level overview that I mentioned before we have Ryan jump into a deep dive on Office 365 migrations. Office 365 runs in Microsoft's Azure data centers. That's what they call their data centers, Azure data centers. And Office 365 services run in those data centers. These data centers are in 140 countries worldwide. Microsoft's broken them out into 60 different regions. Here's a region map of all, and a country map of where everything is. There's a link here that you can click on when you get the slide deck, and this link will take you to this location. You can dig a little deeper into each of these Office 365 Azure data centers. It is important to note you can move your Office 365 data. So if you want it in a different data center than your where you're currently located, you can do that. Some good examples are companies that have a small headquarters in the East Coast, but maybe a whole bunch of users in the West Coast. In those scenarios, they might want to move their Office 365 data to a Azure data center on the West Coast. In addition to having Office 365 Azure data centers across the globe, Microsoft's data centers are also very trusted with a number of security and compliance certifications, more so than any other cloud provider. I've given a small list here, and I've given the URL if you want to click on this, and if you want to see more information about compliance requirements that are your company is having to use, these links can get you there, or you can contact us at Big Green IT and we can help navigate what sort of competency regulations that you've got to follow. For some of you, this is going to be obvious. For those that looking at Office 365 sometime for the first time, it can be kind of mind-numbing, all of the services and features that are in Office 365. We've broken them out here in two categories, one being the Office 365 applications. So we're all familiar with Word, Excel, Outlook, etc. Those are available via an Office 365 subscription. And then the cloud services that are available are email calendaring, which is Exchange, file services, SharePoint, OneDrive, and then the application service that's all the rage right now is Microsoft Teams, and that's available as well in the Office 365 suite of services. And then a couple years ago, Microsoft introduced what's called Microsoft 365 as a bundled product. So it included a number of options, basically in these three different categories. Since then, Microsoft has also changed some of the licensing names. So some Office 365 products have been named recently to Microsoft 365. So again, this can get kind of confusing on licensing. We'll hit on this a little bit later in the presentation, but I wanted to show you for the people that are familiar with some of the Microsoft 365 bundles, this is an overview of what they look like. And then another way to look at some of these Microsoft 365 bundles is that a Microsoft 365 plan of Business Premium E3 or E5 includes all of the services on the left, solutions on the left, all bundled into one product, which can make your life a lot easier, because instead of all of these point solutions on the left, you just get to choose a single product from Microsoft that brings in your antivirus, your chat, your meetings, data loss prevention, encrypted emails if you need to, so on and so forth. And then lastly, before I transition to Ryan, hitting on a high level here are a lot of the security features that are built into Office 365. Microsoft kind of combines this into what they call intelligent security. You can see what they're referring to here in these four different categories. And then what's important to note is that in your Office 365 subscription, you have something called Secure Score, and Secure Score assesses your security posture of your Office 365 environment, gives you a score, and then makes some recommendations on services and features and how to configure them so that you can have more secure devices. You can improve this data security of your within your Office 365 environment, so on and so forth. I've got a link to Secure Score later on in this presentation, and then again, contact us if you'd like to hear anything more about anything security or compliance related into Office 365. So there we go, high level. And now we're going to pass the mic on over to Ryan, and he's going to jump into some migration and deployment discussions. Ryan?
Thank you, Wade. Thank you very much. So yeah, I'm going to kind of go a little bit more in detail, right? It's kind of Wade is showing you on the screen right now some of the migration pitfalls, right, that we run into. And so I'm going to cover some of these actually in detail and kind of how I like to approach our projects and, which helps to make them the most kind of successful. Looking at our Office kind of 365 deployment and how we go at our migration steps, we kind of break them into a multiple of phases. So you go ahead and switch.
Sorry, yeah, my mouse is being a little difficult.
You're good. So, the biggest and most findings, right, is pre-deployment assessment. I'll kind of go in detail on how Big Green IT kind of goes at that and how we provide an assessment. But that's the biggest piece, right? That's looking under the hood, analyzing the systems in place, analyzing the requirements, right, and to come up with, okay, here's potential challenges, right? And then that really leads into that planning phase. Where we want to spend the most amount of time, right? It's analyzing all the data that's been captured in the assessment, right? Understanding what does the end actually look like, what does the user experience look like, and then that'll kind of help us dictate the path forward, right? Then we can really start preparing for our migration, right? Is there any bottlenecks or is there any issues, right? Hey, our assessment may have actually found some migration blockers, right? So now we actually have to go through and remediate, right, all those potential issues, right? So now we're fully preparing the whole entire environment to actually be migrated. In some instances, this may be preparing it to be later decommissioned or preparing it to be living in an actual coexistence mode, right? Once we've kind of done that, we actually go ahead and deploy whatever the migration product or solution is that we're going to use to, right, go forward to actually execute the plan, right? And depending on how we actually get the migration, right, there's a couple different ways on how we can move the data. And I'll go into those a little bit more detail later, but just kind of the high level view, you kind of have three options, right? A cutover, a staged, or a hybrid and coexistence, right? So after we've actually gone through and migrated the data based off the approved method, right, it's now the kind of the cleanup phase. Hey, is there Exchange on-prem that needs to be decommissioned? Or is there hosted email systems that need to be decommissioned? What happens to that data? And any other post cleanup work that needs to be done, training or anything else. Kind of going into how we.
Brian, can I add real quick to that too?
Please, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, if we're doing a migration from either an existing Office 365 tenant or like another web solution from GoDaddy or the list goes on, that post-deployment cleanup can also include making sure you turn off those licenses from those previous providers once everything's up and running well in the Office 365 world.
Awesome.
Thank you, Ryan.
So what we do is a pre-deployment assessment is typically a 2-day engagement of resource time. This may be over a week or 2-week period of time, right? Because it dictates analyzing and gathering data and performance stuff, right? So what we do is we actually go through and we inventory your current environment, analyzing Active Directory, Exchange, and in any of your infrastructure design, right? We actually create a readiness assessment and Exchange health report, as well as some additional reports like permission audits and some other mailbox size and other information will actually help dictate what issues we can come into, right? We'll ultimately make some infrastructure design suggestions, and we'll actually leave the client with an action plan to be able to either execute on themselves or to have us come in and execute. And there's been many times I'll come in and do an assessment and the clients will execute on the migration. And then there's many times where I come in and they're like, hey, we want you to do it end to end, right? And that's the user experience, and I'll kind of come into that thing, right? And typically in some cases, we'll actually, credit some of this back to the migration, because when I go do a migration, I'm always going to do an assessment as part of that migration, right? So if you came to us and asked that, it's better to not have you pay for things twice. Kind of going into the next challenge that a lot of organizations face is authentication. Like, how do you actually want to deal with your identity management? What is that kind of member I mentioned, user experience, right? Do you want to have everyone using the same login everywhere and same password? In some instances, you may be having split identities. And so Microsoft actually supports kind of 3 different authentication methods. And those are, right, cloud identity. This is where your object exists fully in the cloud. It's in the cloud. It has no reference to any on-prem environment. In this instance, if you had a local Active Directory, users may have 2 different logins and they may have 2 different passwords. Yes, they can set those passwords the same, but if when I change my local Active Directory account, it doesn't inherently change my cloud account. And for small businesses, that's maybe fine, but for some larger organizations or those that have Active Directory, they want to have a seamless kind of experience. And that's where we get to, right, directory and password synchronization, where we actually link your on-prem Active Directory up to your Azure Active Directory that your Exchange Online is looking for, right? There's a couple different methods that it supports, whether password hash synchronization or pass-through authentication, and I'll go into those a little bit more detail. And the third option is federation identity, and this gets into if you need super advanced security options, some other geofencing and some other stuff, or you can't have your password hashes actually exist in your Azure Active Directory for either a compliance or a contractual agreement with one of your customers. That's where kind of the ADFS or federated identity comes into. And that's where we're actually federating the cloud to your on-prem organization. And all of those authentications actually go back to the on-prem organization. Getting into the different authentication methods, this is a kind of a good chart to say, hey, here's some different options of what I need to do. Okay, which of these are the ones that will actually, allow me to support that? One of the common ones is single sign-on, right? So I kind of have a good single sign-on. As you can see, I can pick password hash, which is, you look at the top of that's the PHS. PTA, that abbreviates for pass-through authentication. Both of those are in the Azure Active Directory Connect product. And then you get to the last one, federation services. You can see here, federation supports everything, right? If you have an on-prem multi-factor authentication solution you need to integrate with, right, that's where we're back to Active Directory Federation Services. These get into more larger infrastructures, not the small. But as you can see, pass-through authentication, password hash, really the biggest difference between those is whether you can ensure passwords to be stored in the cloud or not. And it's not the password itself, but it's the actual hash that it uses to verify. Getting into kind of the deployment phase, I kind of mentioned there was a couple different migration methods, right? We talk about cutover, staged, and coexistence. So what does that really mean? So when I say cutover, what does that mean? That means at a point in time, we're going to pick that we're going to do a hard cut from one email system to the other. Every data and everybody was pointing to this email server for where they were. Now everybody needs to go point to this one. And usually those will end up with, hey, we're coming from another tenant-to-tenant migration, we're coming from a third-party solution, or we're dealing with a small group of mailboxes where it can allow for. I will say that we do large cutover migrations. We've done 4,000 to 5,000 user cutover migrations, but usually in those instances, there's, I'll kind of talk about the coexistence, right? A staged migration. So staged migration is very similar to a cutover, except for we're going to carve those groups up, and then we're going to move those as separate groups, right? So I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to move all HR first, right? And so it's a staged migration. And depending on your source environment or your target environment, this may or may not, or not your target, sorry, your source environment, it may not be available to you, right? If I'm coming from a hosted solution, and this gets into mail routing and, contact records and then kind of that third option is coexistence. If you're coming from and already using an Exchange system, my preference is to go with a coexistence mode. That's what Microsoft prefers. And that's where we kind of talk about like a hybrid, right? That's where we actually set up your local Exchange services and in a hybrid mode with the Office 365 Exchange Online. And this leverages the best user experience because it's like moving mailboxes in your internal Exchange server on-prem. Users don't really know when you move their mailboxes. However, the effort going in to get it to that point, right, is a lot more of engineering time. And then kind of talking about the different migration methods, there's 3 different ways to actually migrate, right? There's what we call a data only. And this is where we're simply going to the source email server and we're copying all that mail data and we're basically cloning it to the exchange online, right? We're just going to do the mail data. This means that users are still responsible for going through reconfiguring their mobile devices, reconfiguring their Outlook profiles, and reprofiling that. And small organizations or those that may have a fair amount of technical staff on staff to help can helpfully make those go a little bit more smoother. But there is a little bit more effort, right? Because people are having to go in and do that. To mitigate some of those user changes, we move into a data and client. And I think we call this the data synchronization migration.
Right.
And this is where we're going to wholesale sync the data on the back end like we do in a data only. However, on the front end, there's an agent that ultimately gets deployed to everyone's system, right? And what this agent does is helps to coordinate at that time you're going to migrate, creating their new Outlook profile, going into their existing Outlook profile. Hey, did I have any mail rules? What autofill records did I have? And I'm now going to go capture all that was tagged in my source email server on the client system, and I'm going to migrate that client's connection over. This makes a lot more of a seamless, less user action, but it does require, right, pushing an agent out to each system and getting that out. And then kind of that last piece is the hybrid. This is where we prefer to live if we're working with a source exchange server. And like I mentioned before, this is where we'll actually build a hybrid connection from your on-prem servers up to Exchange Online, and then we will be simply moving the mailbox from the source server up to the target. And to the users, they don't see any difference. What they'll see is they'll get a little prompt saying, hey, the administrators made a change to your mailbox. We need you to close your Outlook and relaunch it. On that process, they close their Outlook, they relaunch it, they connect to Active Directory, it sees that their mailbox is moved, and it automatically reconnects them to Office 365. Same thing with mobile devices. Mobile devices will be automatically cut over because it has fidelity of the information from the on-prem exchange to reconnect those connections to the new tenant, right? And that's obviously my biggest, right? But there's a lot more effort and sometimes more cost, but it does give you the best user experience. Kind of going into some of the challenges that we face, and you hear me talking about a user experience. And this is kind of my number one challenge now. And this is really coming up to understand what do you want your users to do or to not do, right? And dictating that experience, because that's ultimately going to either decide what options are or aren't available to you to move. And that's the biggest, right? Is at least everybody's aware of, upfront as we're starting to scope the project, right? What is that experience you want to users, right? Are you okay with users reprofiling their computers, resetting up their mobile devices, or no? That's a deal breaker for me. I can't have that. And right, understanding all of those, because it really kind of sets those expectations so that everybody's working on the same page. And the other one is email is not always the hard part. Right? Because the email is the data that's in there. There's so many other things that touch our email systems that isn't the actual message in your inbox. And so taking a wholesome understanding of all the different pieces that are in play and making sure that we're not affecting another part during this migration. Garbage in is garbage out, right? The biggest thing I always come up with my assessments is, hey, now is the best opportunity to clean house and bring things up to whatever your current standard is. Or if you don't have a standard in place, hey, let's set one. And now at least you have a policy going forward. Because if you have garbage in your current system, you're literally just going to be moving that garbage from one location to another. And you end up are going to have the same pain points on the target system that you potentially had on your legacy system, right? Legacy applications, this is another one where, hey, I have clients that we've developed our own third-party application that actually runs on our Exchange servers that does a function. Some of these could have been, a perfect example is like email signatures. That's one of the more common ones I see is there's some third-party solutions. And understanding all of those and is end up one of those legacy applications and its integration into Exchange actually pause the migration product because now we have to go address the legacy application before we can start moving the mail, right? If that's a deal breaker or not, right? And then kind of getting into migration bottlenecks. Those are most likely legacy applications that weren't defined in the first part which has happened on one of mine. A perfect example is, we went through and we checked the voicemail system and all that, and it was all great. But however, they ended up finding that, it was missing one update for what it was. And then now like voicemail boxes weren't being delivered, right? Those are the things that being aware of those up front in the project and not saying like, oh yeah, I know we totally forgot. We've had this system that's been sitting there for the last 15 years that I'm the only person that's known about that. And yeah, it actually just broke, right? Those are the pieces of hopefully understanding all this, right? And the biggest one is you don't know what you don't know, and always allowing extra time, right? There's always having enough time to analyze it and make an educated decision usually benefits your users and the end piece. And kind of, going back to, right, the biggest thing I don't want is people losing contact data, right, email rules, or any of those pieces during a migration, right? Because that's a disruption to your users. And then this is not going to make it a great experience to them. I mean, to me, a perfect migration is something that the users will do little or no action, right? They just keep working as they do on a daily basis. And what we do is we do our job right. We do it in the back end so they don't see those changes, right? They just keep working on as they've been working. At some point, right, there are going to be changes, right? And making sure you select the right tool, and that ends up getting into, right, doing an appropriate assessment, understanding, what are the source systems and any, requirements that those may have. We've worked with some third, party hosted where there's only one option to move out of that, and that is your only option. And that's one of the things to discuss. And then sometimes the challenges that come from that is that, well, then there's some additional effort that needs to go, right? And then one of the other ones is also, right, kind of determining, right, what's the right license and all the different licensing options that you kind of have available. And that's one of the ones I'm kind of Wade's going to talk about here a little bit, is kind of some of the different licensing options that you guys do have.
Thank you, Ryan. And before I get to licensing, I do want to hit on something that Ryan said. We manage over 35,000 Office 365 licenses for our customers. We do migrations all the time, multiple ones a week. So for us, migrations are kind of like going to Jiffy Lube. We're so used to it, and we see all the wild range of requirements and needs. And so based on our experience, and Ryan's done a whole bunch of these, as is the rest of our team, we're comfortable at looking at these simple environments or difficult environments and then proposing the best solutions for our customers for migrations. And then related to that is the very, very fun world of dealing with Microsoft licensing. We often joke you need a PhD in Microsoft licensing just to understand it. And as soon as you understand it, it changes the next month. I hit earlier on the bundles, the Microsoft 365 bundles versus the a la carte. You can mix and match. A lot of times you get questions asking, do I have to have all of the same license? And the answer is no. You can mix and match among your employee base. There's the enterprise versus the business bundles. The Microsoft 365 or Office 365 business bundles have a limit of 300 users for any individual products on that. And then there's different Microsoft licensing vehicles, Open Volume, EA, the list goes on. So we deal with all these licenses as well. And again, we'll help all of our customers figure out the best license for them, doing a license assessment, and then choose the option that gives them the lowest cost solution. As we're nearing the end of this presentation, in this slide deck that you'll get an email with this slide deck. I've included links to the topics that we've discussed, including a lot of more information from us on our Office 365 migration blogs. We've got multiple blogs and video blogs on that site that discuss all of this information in more detail, and then links on all the other topics we've hit so far. And so as we're getting towards the end of this, some of the next steps that we'd like to present to you is we offer Big Green IT Cloud Consultations. So we offer these consultations. You can click on this link on our website, schedule a consult. You'll get me or a handful of other people in our organization, and we can talk to you about any of your cloud needs. So it's not just Office 365, we can talk Azure as well. So feel free to click on that and schedule a consultation at a day and time that works for you. Ryan mentioned the Microsoft or Office 365 readiness assessment. I put it here Microsoft 365 because Microsoft's, again, merging those Microsoft 365 and Office 365 terms. So feel free to contact Tracy Harper at our team to learn more about a readiness assessment. And then we're doing our part to help during this pandemic. So we've got a COVID-19 cost relief offer. If you sign up with Big Green IT as a new customer before the end of this month, we can have up to 1 month of cost relief. And again, Tracy Harper, the same person, if you contact her, she can get back to you and discuss more of the details of this cost relief offer.
Perfect. And I think, Wade, one last point I just wanted to touch on kind of from one of the polls is I noticed there's some of you out there that are continuing to use Exchange 2010. For those of you that may or may not be aware, actually, end of support for 2010 was actually supposed to end this last year, or actually beginning of this year. However, they have extended it through October 13th of this year. So what does that mean when Microsoft says end of support? What that means is that Microsoft will no longer provide technical support for problems that may occur, bug fixes, security fixes, or time zone updates. So for some of you that are using Exchange 2010, it'll continue to work. However, you are now going to be in an unsupported solution, and be happy to sit down and discuss with those of you that are using 2010 on how we can help get you off of that 2010 server by the end of this year, so you don't end up with a my biggest fear is, right, security vulnerabilities or something like that in the modern world that we live in. That's one of the pieces. And like the biggest thing, like I really, I want to make sure, like, if you have any questions or anything, right, feel free to reach out. We're kind of a open door policy to be able to be here as a trusted advisor. We're not always going to try to push you to do the work. We're willing to actually sit down and partner with organizations to bridge that work between both parties.
And if you are on Exchange 2010 and you feel like you're alone, you're not. We get companies coming to us all the time going, I think I'm the only one on Exchange 2010. I need to move. It's like, no, there's a lot of people still on Exchange 2010. And yes, you need to move. It's end of life, end of support, end of service, but you're not alone. So I get that every time on a phone call going, I feel so bad. I think I'm the only one on Exchange 2010. Nope. We actually had a call a few months ago with somebody still on Exchange 2000 or 2003, I can't remember. So a lot of those older products do exist. Last slide here in our deck is, and again, you'll get this in the link that's sent to you, is just my LinkedIn profile, so you want to connect to me, summary of the cloud consultation readiness assessment and the COVID-19 cost relief. And then a few more things on Big Green IT. We're a member of Microsoft's data center optimization team. We subscribe to Microsoft's Premier Support program, which means we get the best engineers at Microsoft for any kind of support needs. We have our own support team, but if we need to escalate it to Microsoft, we have the highest level support available from Microsoft. We're also on Microsoft's Partner Advisory Council, where they ask us for our opinion on where future products should go, roadmap items. And then we're part of Microsoft's International Association of Microsoft Partners, which means if you need something from us and we don't do it, we can easily find another partner out there that can do the work for you. So that wraps up our webinar, and I appreciate everybody taking time out of their day to meet with us. I'm looking at the questions now. I think we just had one, which was a poll choice. So Kevin, we'll get back to you on that, and we can talk about that question. So you'll hear from us afterwards. And Ryan, thanks for doing a great job deep diving into the Office 365 migration world, including some of the pitfalls. And to everybody else who was on this webinar, have a great day and stay safe out there. And you'll be getting an email with a link to this. And please don't hesitate to contact myself, Tracy, Ryan, or anybody else at Big Green IT with any questions.
Yeah, appreciate everybody joining today.
All right, Ryan, I'll wave goodbye to you and I'll wave goodbye to everybody. All right, have a good one, everybody.
Have a good one.